My name is Maria Toso, and I am the creator of the Heal What Hurts process, and it's a process that was born out of my own healing process. When I was quite young, 4 and again at age 5, I was hospitalized for a pretty extended period of time. And here we got my little friend, my little sweetheart. And I knew about that. As I grew up and through my teens, I remember my parents telling me that, and I had vague memories of it, but I didn't have a real feeling in the body about it. And then when I was around 19, I started meditating, and that was unusual at the time. This is like 1989, 1990 in Copenhagen, Denmark. And I visited a friend who lived in Germany at the time, and it was actually her boyfriend who introduced me to Buddhist meditation, Tibetan Kagyu lineage Buddhist meditation to be exact. And it turned out that they had another center, Buddhist center, very close to where I lived in Copenhagen. So I started attending regular meditations that entailed noticing your breath and feeling your body. And there's different techniques for that. And many traditions have their way of making you feel your breath and feel your body, because when you do, you become closer aligned with the eternal, infinite part of yourself that's currently embodying this body, and you start to become aware of what's going on in the energy field of my body and what is it that I'm here to work through. But around that same time, a friend of mine, the same friend who worked in Germany, actually, come to think of it, her mom had a best friend who was a nurse, and she had learned something called rebirthing, which is a breathwork technique where you breathe very deeply for close to an hour. I can't remember exactly how long it was, but it was a long time, and it was just she and I in a room on a massage table. And in the process of breathing that way, feelings started rising to the surface, feelings that had been deeply buried, as it would turn out, in my body since I was 4 or 5 years old. And it was not the memories like in the thought realm of, oh, I was in the hospital when I was little. It was the feeling, the felt sensation in the body of the fear that I experienced at that young age. This was a time in the 70s in Denmark when nurses were told, I later met a nurse who worked in the hospital, and she literally told me this, that they were told that little kids should not be coddled, hugged, shown a whole lot of empathy because they needed to be toughened up. So there was not a lot, there was none that I can recall, kind of empathy and warmth and nurturing kindness. And then there were visiting hours. So you saw your parents once a day, and the rest of the time you're kind of on your own. And the fear associated with that time, which also included a lot of kind of medical testing, blood tests and x-ray machines and drinking radioactive fluid and just things that were horrible for a 4-year-old who doesn't understand, what have I done to deserve this? So that was all in the body. And during the breathwork session, it rose to the surface, and I was crying so hard. It was like all the grief that hadn't been processed, because no one asked me, like, how are you doing? What is this like? Or are you scared? Or here I am. It just wasn't part of the time. So this is not even about assigning blame to my parents at the time. This is just how it was. So I had to kind of be present with it as an adult, such as it was. I was only 19, which is still pretty young. So that was my first awareness of how much that was stuck in my body. Now, it didn't leave my body just because I felt it that one time, as huge as it was and as intense as it was. I was now aware that this was lingering in the body, and it would show up in very specific situations, specifically if I felt abandoned, surprise, surprise. So when I would get into relationships, and say a boyfriend, because I'm heterosexual, would abandon me in some way, would not show up or be there for me or do something as promised, or I couldn't count on this person, then that feeling would arise again, and it would feel really horrible. And I would do one of two things. I would either try very hard to change the boyfriend, or I would stalk off and leave the boyfriend, because clearly this was not a good boyfriend since I was feeling this way. And it took quite some time, even with meditation, to really realize, wow, this is something inside myself. One Buddhist explained it to me this way. He said, it's like you are the eternal light, the life-giving light, the inner Buddha, the inner divinity within yourself. And you're projecting out whatever's in your mind, the energy field of your body and in your mind, that's going to be projected out as the movie, and that's what you will experience. So until you have that concept that the feelings that arise in the body, it seems so real that they're being imposed on you from the outside because you're in a certain situation. And it really can take a while to turn it around and be like, wow, this is coming from inside of me. Someone else might not react this way in my same situation. And I don't even react this way with all individuals. There are some that trigger this in me and some that don't. And it took more time to realize that the ones that would trigger it, surprise, surprise, had something in common with my caretakers, my parents. They reminded me of them in some way. So I was already sort of dialed into that part of myself that was looking for a caretaking vibe. And also, surprise, surprise, I ended up being with partners that were quite a bit older than myself. So I would look for that safety in the other that I hadn't been able to find as a kid. And this has been a decade-long process, not one decade, decades, plural, to start to unravel the ways in which I have strategized to not feel that sense of abandonment. And it really wasn't up until, I would say, 7-8 years ago that I really started to recognize, and that doesn't mean I did it perfectly from then on, but I started to recognize with the help of teachers that it was something that I carried around inside of me that was being triggered by the exact energetic match to what I needed to feel that again. And that only with my own divine presence being super closely brought back into myself could I start to heal that inside myself. So that's been the work. And it's when I work with clients in what I call the Heal What Hurts process, whether private coaching clients or in a group setting, even though I say, let's work on this for 8 weeks, that means you get all the tools. That means now you're equipped to look at it differently and handle it differently. Does that mean that you're suddenly going to, from now on, handle your emotional triggers differently? It's going to take some time to turn around. In my case, it took longer than most people, I think, because I'm watching my students do it faster than I did. And does that mean that I'm a worse student? Maybe. It doesn't even really matter. It means that from the moment you start recognizing this is my inner work that's arising, and I'm here to fully unite with the divine within myself so that I don't need someone else to change. And either the person outside yourself, their behavior just won't trigger you anymore, or it still won't feel good and you'll just choose not to be with someone who does that thing, because we tend to be attracted to people that are maybe not the best when we have those wounds inside, but we could co-evolve with them, or we would end up not being interested in them because they wouldn't energetically match us anymore because we don't have that gaping hole within anymore once we've started filling that out with our own divinity. So the Heal What Hurts process is doing that work in a group or one-on-one, and it's very powerful to do it in a group. So even though I have a lot of private coaching clients, I really encourage everyone to take the Heal What Hurts process 8-week course, because to observe yourself over the course of 8 weeks with a group where there's a certain degree of accountability is just incredibly powerful. So call me, contact me, message me, and let's have a conversation about whether this is the right fit for you at this time, if you're ready to dive in and start detaching from the reactive part of yourself that would run the show and that feels like, unless something out there changes, I'm not going to cope, where the real change is under the hood and you have the power to do that. So I'm really excited to talk to you about that and to work with you and support you through that process.